South Africa's socio-economic challenges continues to hit the most vulnerable in society the hardest, leading to an increase in the number of those looking to the Department of Social Development for social protection. There's progress made, though, in getting a step closer to the introduction of a basic income grant.
The discourse has really shifted over the past few months and maybe years. Before, the discussion was, should we bring a basic income grant? And that was the first report that we launched last year in Cape Town in, I think it was December, if I'm not mistaken. But the discourse is now shifting to how best can we actually implement the grant. It's no longer should we, it's how best can we. And the report that we are launching here today really starts to look at the various options that are available in terms of bringing the grant into fruition. And I think a lot of questions have been asked. Can we afford it? Who will pay for it? Where will the money come from, etc.? And I think the report begins to unearth a number of those specific areas.
Poverty, inequality and unemployment continue to rise due to the current poor economic growth, with at least 10 million beneficiaries depending on the monthly 350 special COVID-19 social relief of distress grant alone. A non-profit organization, #PayTheGrant, says this is not enough and is calling for the speedy introduction of a basic income grant.
The 350 has no value in this rising cost of living. Currently, we're all sitting here and knowing how expensive it is to survive, more especially for us as the poor and unemployed. I think for some of you, it might be easier, even with the high cost of food, petrol, and all of those things. But for us, it hit on us 3 times worse than everybody else sitting in this room. Maybe to explain why I'm saying that, if you check how much is this 350 per month, is equals to 11 rand a day, which cannot even afford a loaf of bread, which cannot even afford a liter of paraffin.
An expert panel set up to look into the country's fiscal protection says this process is an important component for both human and economic development and has emphasized the importance of getting it right. It has recommended that there should be a consideration to keep the 350 grant as a permanent feature while working towards the basic income grant.
It was concluded that the SRD arrangement, although we didn't fully evaluate it last year on its own because we analysed a much bigger allocation, a much bigger type of grant just to look at its impact. The SRD arrangement, it was concluded because it was a smaller allocation and a smaller grant. Therefore, it's less risky from a fiscal perspective and from all other perspectives. Posed a limited economic and fiscal risk and should be made permanent.
The Department of Social Development has been working with the International Labour Organization and the United Nations on fine-tuning the country's process towards a basic income grant.
This is reflected in the United Nations Secretary General's program on the Global Accelerator on Social Protection and Jobs. So what we are dealing with, I think it's always very important to remember, is a global context. It's a challenge that's not only a South African challenge, it's not an African challenge, it's a global challenge. The report is therefore, in this context, an effort at evidence-based policy making. And the minister has referred to it and she was quite emphatic that this time around we must make it happen.
Economists have also weighed in on the feasibility of a basic income grant in a country with an ailing economy.
We think that the release of this report is very timely. It addresses a number of the questions that people who were concerned about the introduction of a basic income grant had. For instance, the affordability. The report shows with microeconomic simulations that firstly the basic income grant, a universal basic income grant, would be affordable. Secondly, the impact on the economy is incredibly positive.
The Basic Income Report affirms that income poverty in South Africa is extremely pervasive, with more than half of the country's households continuing to live in poverty. Proposals to urgently solidify the SRD grant for the vulnerable features large in the report on calls for maintained social protection, especially for the working age group of 18 to 59 years. The Basic Income Report will be taken to Parliament for policy consideration, looking at the economic and fiscal consideration on the process to was the introduction of a basic income grant. Katlego Legodi, SABC News, Kempton Park.